I used to think they were called odd time signatures because they have an odd number of beats in a measure, like 5/4 or 13/8. But then I think if you had a bar of, say, 26/16, it would still be considered an odd time signature, right? So I think it's just because they feel odd. It's just because they're unusual time signatures. And sure, they're a little strange, but odd time signatures don't have to feel weird or bad. You can make an odd time signature groove, and if you do it right, your average listener may not even notice that they're not in your regular old 4/4 time. I think it's about time for a part 2 of odd time signatures in video game music. So let's move through some progressively weirder and weirder examples while we try to answer the question, how do you make an odd time signature feel ordinary? When it comes to odd time signatures, the higher the number on the top of the fraction, the weirder the music sounds. So let's start nice and easy with an example in 5/4 time. Wild Woods from Mario Kart 8. Wild Woods is interesting just for being the only Mario Kart track with music in an odd time signature. And, being Mario Kart music, its job is clear: to maintain the drive necessary to accompany a hectic race to the finish line, to capture the energetic and upbeat atmosphere usually achieved through fast, funky 4/4 grooves. To get the right level of energy without the benefit of an even number of beats in a bar, the track pushes up the tempo and features a busy rhythm section of bass, drums, and acoustic guitar, laying out the classic 5/4 clave rhythm throughout the track. That's 2 dotted quarter notes followed by 2 regular quarter notes. This 5/4 clave is good at generating forward momentum at quick tempos, as seen most famously in the Mission Impossible soundtrack, but I find nowadays it can feel a little square. Breaking the bar so cleanly up into a 3-beat half and a 2-beat half makes it easier to feel the 5-beat pulse, but if we want our groove to feel more natural, this pulse has to be obscured a little bit. Lucky for us, the subtler aspects of Wild Woods' arrangement showcase 2 different concepts that I think can make odd time signatures feel a lot more hip: having the bar and implying cross rhythms. The first concept, having the bar, involves using rhythms that chop up the bar into 2 equal halves. Let's look at the very first bar of the piece, this 1 bar of full band unison hits. It looks like a simple embellishment of the 5/4 clave rhythm at first, but notice something interesting. If we divide this bar into 2 groups of 5/8 notes, the rhythm is the exact same in both groups. 2 eighth notes followed by an 8th rest, another 8th note, and then another 8th rest. The rhythm of this bar is symmetrical, but because it's an odd meter, we feel the one half as being on the beat and the other half as being off the beat. Splitting an odd bar in half like this gives us a middle point in each measure, and in 5/4 this would be the and of beat 3. Any amount of accenting this middle point will make your odd time signature sound more even and less lopsided than the typical approach of breaking the bar up into chunks of 2 and 3 beats. And while the rhythm section is holding down that 5/4 clave pattern throughout the tune, the melody frequently emphasizes the middle point of each measure, and it lightens up the music. The first phrase of this soprano sax melody gives us the highest notes of the bar on beat 1 and beat 3.5. See how it feels like the melody is floating over the rhythm section rather than being locked into an endlessly repeating clave pattern? The second concept I want to mention is implying cross rhythms. Let's jump over to this transitionary figure that shows up throughout Wild Woods, and then I'll explain what I mean. If we look at the notes that are accented in this figure, the high notes that are being leapt up to, as well as beat 1 of the measure, which always feels like the strongest beat in any time signature, we can see that we have groups of 3 accented notes a beat and a half apart. The and of beat 4, beat 1, and then the and of beat 2. This implies a cross rhythm of dotted quarter notes going over the bar line. Grouping accents in dotted quarter notes like this is super common in normal time signatures. It's a way of writing rhythms that spill out of the measure, that feel more organic than rhythms that are constantly reiterating the basic pulse of the music. Listen to this rhythm and pay attention to how it plays off of the 5/4 clave rhythm in the bass and drums. These syncopated rhythms give the piece so much energy and deftly avoid that dreaded feeling of, yeah, I get it, there's the beat, that can arise when odd time signatures aren't handled in a sophisticated way. The music to recent indie hit Balatro is a beautiful example of fluid odd time writing. The game's music is in 7/4 time, with the chords and bass repeating the same one-bar rhythmic pattern for the entirety of the loop. Lucky for us, Balatro's theme smartly crafts this rhythmic pattern to feel meditative rather than overbearing. The rhythm of the chords perfectly follows the principle of cutting the bar in half. Not only does this rhythm catch the middle point of the bar, the and of beat 4, but if we cut each measure into 2 equal chunks of 7/8 notes, we'll see that the rhythm of both halves are just about identical. This just about symmetrical rhythm, when placed on top of a steady quarter note pulse, flip-flops between landing on the beat and off the beat, giving a satisfying push and pull that keeps the music interesting even after dozens of repetitions. The bass line breaks each bar into 2 halves too, the first half laying down the root of each chord and the second half giving a winding 8th note fill to lead to the next bar. But notice how the bass also catches the middle point of each measure before moving into each fill. Now, you can't have everything be so symmetrical that it turns a bar of 7/4 into 2 bars of 7/8. You want that middle point accent playing off of a steady quarter note pulse to generate rhythmic interest. The winning results music from Mario Kart 64 has no shortage of rhythmic interest, and it's thanks to its use of multiple cross rhythms that play off of each other simultaneously. You have to be a winner to get treated to this funky groove in 11/8 time. This one feels a little bit perplexing because there is a lot of stuff going on, but it does a good job of hiding just how odd its meter is. The main rhythmic thrust is provided by the bass line, which breaks up each bar of 11 into 2 quarter notes, a 3/8 note grouping jumping up an octave and then coming back down, and then ending with 2 more quarter notes. This is probably as steady a beat as you could get out of a bar of 11/8, and you can think of it as being subdivided into 4 plus 3 plus 4 eighth notes. That's just mathematics. But underneath this, the drums are emphasizing a totally different rhythm. The hi-hats are playing a steady stream of 16th notes, emphasizing the first of each 4-note group to provide a consistent quarter note pulse. But putting a steady quarter note pulse over top of an odd time signature is always going to make it flip between landing on the beat and off the beat as you move from measure to measure. That's just mathematics. So the way the hi-hat accents line up with the bass line changes every other measure. This is another kind of cross rhythm, these straight quarter notes rolling across the bar line to make the music feel a little more fluid and give you something consistent to bob your head to. This consistency is a crucial element of music that feels good, and the way it bounces off the bass line blurs the line of where each bar starts and ends. When we add in the kick and snare, things get even more blurry. If we isolate the drums, the kick and snare seem to be breaking up every 2 bars of 11/8 into a bar of 5/4 and a bar of 6/4. That's just mathematics. On its own, this groove feels pretty natural thanks to the way the kick drum hits offbeats going over this imaginary bar line, blending the two meters together so the asymmetry isn't so obvious. But when coupled with the bass line, things get pretty crazy. We're cutting up 11 eighth notes in so many different ways, into a 4+3+4 pattern in the bass, a steady 2-group pattern in the hi-hats, and alternating 10 and 12 note groups in the kick and snare. Altogether, it feels good, but it's one of those pieces that gets weirder and weirder the more you pay attention to it. Like, start trying to predict where the snare hits are going to land and feel your head explode. Sagat's theme from Street Fighter II is another 11/8 banger, which also layers different cross rhythms on top of each other to create a busy, syncopated groove. The first thing you'll likely notice is the bass line, which rolls out a string of 16th note F-sharp root notes that get interrupted by these groovy, syncopated jumps up to an A and down to an E before sliding back up to the root. These offbeat stabs stand out a lot, popping out of the constant driving root notes, and they form a little motif that you're able to recognize even if it gets shifted around to start at a different spot on the beat. And we see that pretty much right away. This figure repeats note for note but shifted to start on the and of beat 3 rather than starting on another downbeat. We're not perfectly dividing the bar in half like we saw in our earlier examples. A perfect middle point in a bar of 11/8 would mean accenting the last 16th note of beat 3 of the bar, but we are using a symmetrical rhythm that starts on the beat and then repeats off of the beat, with the middle point of the bar buried in a string of repeated notes. The melody on top does split the bar in half in a way though. If we cut the bar into two groups of 11 16th notes, we can see that the first half of each bar is filled up with 16th note syncopated melody that stops exactly before the middle point, and the second half of each bar is filled with a held note. Now, the kick drum accents this rhythm outlined by the bass, but the snare and hi-hats give us a steady backbeat over top, which gives the rhythm of the bass something to bounce off of. If the melody weren't so clearly establishing beat 1 of each bar, it would be very hard to keep track of where we are thanks to how well the bass line is obscuring the meter, even without crossing the bar line at all. Now, one of my favorite things as a drummer is exploring how different cross rhythms can change the feel of a piece of music, and we see a beautiful example of this on the repetition of the melody as the drums switch to a double time feel. The snare moves to the offbeats, and the kick drum does these bouncy punk drumming style rhythms in between the beats. These fit great with the new double time feel, but they're also cleverly placed to line up with the syncopated accents in the bass. Keeping these snare hits consistent means that they swap to landing on the downbeats of every second bar, but this flip-flop between being on-beat and off-beat, as we've seen in our previous examples, is what grooving in odd time signatures is all about. I love the amount of drive this section has, how different it feels from the first section when the only thing that's changed is the drum part. Even music without a drum part can use this effect though by changing how the notes in a bar are grouped together and accented. One piece from The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time with a very odd time signature, no, not that one, we did that last time, is the fairy flying theme. The A sections are in 13/8, broken up into an easy to digest pattern of 3 groups of 3/8 notes followed by 2 groups of 2/8 notes. This rhythm is kept light by the understated instrumentation and reinforced by the contour of the scalar melody and the placement of these bass notes. It's melodic enough to remember even if you're not a turbo nerd time signature fiend like myself. But there's an interesting shift that happens in the piece's B section. We move from 13/8 time to 5/8 time, with the melody playing a series of 2-note trills to fill up each bar. These bars aren't broken into groups of 3 and 2, the typical method of handling odd time signatures and pieces with a more classical bent. Instead, we feel the pulse of this section as being 5/8 notes long. Check out how different this transition feels, moving from the previous section of 3 and 2/8 note pulses into this 5/8 bit. You can totally feel the music pull back, instantly flipping from the erratic flapping of fairy wings to a more confused, bumbling feeling. This concept is taken to the extreme in the Mad Luca boss theme from Suikoden II. Now, this is definitely straying from the concept of how to make an odd meter feel good, but it just wouldn't be right to end an odd time signature video without an absolutely ludicrous example. Mad Luca is made up almost entirely of a unison stream of 16th notes jumping around in jagged lines, accompanied only with bass hits that signal beat 1 of each measure. And you need a signal on beat 1 of each measure because the time signature changes are constant and so bizarre. 9/8 moves to 4/4, moves to 15/16, moves to 18/16. A series of bars of 5/16 are interrupted with one-off bars of 3/8 and 7/16, and to top it all off, there are a handful of moments where the tempo just slows down or speeds up, just to make absolutely sure you can't find your rhythmic footing. This piece is fascinating though. Like Fairy Flying, it's clear that the whole composition is driven by these time signature changes, and like Fairy Flying, the changes in accented groupings changes the feel of the music. Only, in this example, the changes are so drastic and jerk you around so quickly that it feels like you're riding a roller coaster. The melody line is a series of leaps of perfect fourths that shift chromatically around, completely unmelodic in every sense, but perfect for clearly marking shifts in rhythmic groupings. The opening bars in 9/8 time see groups of 3/16 notes running up and down as outlined by these chromatically shifting stacks of fourths. This pattern creates a feeling of larger 6-note waves, creating a pulse that we can feel as 3 big beats per measure. When this moves into this bar of 4/4 though, the melody line gives us this abrupt upward leap of a major 7th to snap us out of that rhythmic feel that we were just in, and then it runs down a series of perfect fourths to create an 8-note group, totally shaking up the big 3-beat pulse. The following bar of 15/16 lays out a very clear series of 3-note ascending groups, a much more headstrong, barreling forward kind of feeling than either of the previous rhythmic groupings. Listen and pay attention to how each shift in rhythmic groupings jolts you out of the vibe created from the previous group. The goal here is definitely, specifically, to feel bad. So maybe you can think of this as a what not to do lesson, and it does tie into the theme of the video after all? No? Oh well, I tried. Once you realize what the music is trying to do, it becomes pretty funny to listen to. The way this bar of 18/16, made up of 3-note groups, moves into a series of 5-note groups is similar to what we heard in Fairy Flying, but just as we get a chance to get accustomed to these 5-note groups, staccato 8th notes are slipped in unforeseeable places. The music seems to be saying, oh, just kidding, oh, did you think, oh, just kidding, oh. I think you get the picture, but if you're interested, I have this whole piece transcribed on my Patreon, and it's kind of fun to follow along with the score while you listen to this madness. How you craft your melodies and grooves rhythmically makes such a huge difference to the feel of the music. Splitting up a bar just so can make an odd time signature feel totally normal. Accenting a certain rhythm can make the difference between your music being endlessly enjoyable and completely annoying. And changing up how you accent the music can create big shifts in the feeling it provokes in the listener. So, whether you're trying to make your odd time signatures feel even, or trying to make your music completely inscrutable, I hope this video had something interesting for you. Big thanks to patrons Wodenaz and Mel for suggesting a couple of the examples used in this video. Thanks so much to you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.